Yeah, gig. Yeah. Hey, what's up everyone? I'm Will, and today we're not going to be riding. Many of you have been asking me questions about my GoPro settings and setup, so today I'm going to share them with you with a particular focus on skiing. Well, let's get started. First off, my primary camera is the GoPro Hero 7. Now, why the 7 and not the 8 or the 9? Well, personally, I find the 7 the better action camera, while the 8 and 9 do have slightly better battery life and stabilization. They're less durable. The GoPro Hero 7 comes with an external hardshell case and has a replaceable lens. In addition to that, it is the cheapest of the three, around $330 Canadian. Third-party batteries are super easy to find. The stabilization is almost good enough for what I use it for. And I really think the image quality from what I've seen is about on par with the 8 and 9. Now, the other camera that I occasionally use is the GoPro Max. Now, I like to use this camera when I'm skiing in the open alpine terrain and I want to catch everything around me, or when I'm mountain biking and I want to capture the steepness of the trail. However, that said, I would not recommend the GoPro Max itself. It's a big, heavy camera. The camera itself is buggy, and then the software that you must use for editing the GoPro Max footage is pretty buggy. It crashes, it's slow. So that said, I'd highly recommend just taking a look at what the Insta360 has for 360 cameras. Now, the other system that I have, which I actually don't use very often anymore, is the GoPro Hero 4 with the gimbal. Now, if you're after super stable, clear 4K footage, this system is really hard to beat. And you could probably get it for around $200 to $250 Canadian used. However, just be aware that the microphones, while they are really good on the Hero 4, they pick up the motor noise from the gimbal. So that's one thing to keep in mind. You might need to set up a lapel mic. Alright, well, those are the cameras I use. Now, let's take a look at how I go about mounting these cameras. So we'll quickly cover mountain biking. So for mountain biking, I prefer the chin mount. It gives you guys a really good view of the trail ahead of me, and I find it a little bit more interactive because you're going to see whatever it is I'm looking at. And so how do I go about mounting to the chin? Well, for this helmet, it has a flat mount, so I just took some VHB or GoPro tape, stuck a tripod mount onto there, and then secured it with a couple of zip ties. Now, I've been using this system for about 2 years now, and it's been super solid and reliable. This year I got another helmet for downhill biking, and it had a rounded chin. So rather than try to glue it on and then make holes in the mesh in the front here, I took some moldable glue that's called Sugru, and it comes in white and black. And basically I just took another tripod mount, glued it to the chin, and then took the extra glue and molded it all around so it kind of looks nice and maybe gives it a bit more security. So they're both good systems. Depending on which helmet you want, you might want to try them. For a half shell, I just mount it on the top. I don't mount it too far forward or else I find the helmet too bouncy. However, for skiing, I just mount right on the front of the helmet because the goggles kind of prevent the helmet from shaking around too much. And I like mounting it in the front because then the helmet doesn't take up any real estate in the footage, and you can angle the GoPro down a little bit, which gives you a little bit better perspective on the steepness of the whatever it is I'm skiing. So for mounting the GoPro Hero Max, for mountain biking, I take this little aluminum extension that I got on Amazon. I put it on the top of the helmet like this, and then the GoPro Max on top, just to get a little bit higher up off the helmet. Now, one thing to be aware of is any fallen trees or low-lying branches, etc., that can catch the camera. For skiing, I use I use a selfie stick here, and this one I got on Amazon. I'll leave a link below if you're interested. But it's carbon fiber. I think it was around $40 Canadian. It's compact, screws in half, very light and stiff. I really like it. So one way to use it is to simply hold it out in front of you, and this will catch you and all the surrounding terrain. I don't use it because I'm not that good of a skier, but the way I use it is I just stick it into a side pocket on my backpack and secure it with the side straps. It gets the camera nice and high up above you so you can capture a lot of the terrain around you. Now, for this, obviously it's a chest mount. I don't prefer the chest mount simply because it gets a lot of other things in the view. So you get the handlebars, you get the bike frame, you get your arms, and in my opinion, it doesn't add a lot of value to the video. In addition to that, it is rather uncomfortable to be having this on your chest the whole time. It's kind of heavy and you have more batteries to deal with. But like I said, it's still a good system for crisp, stable 4K footage, and it's a pretty affordable system. So that's how I go about mounting these cameras. Now let's take a look at some of the settings that I use. Okay, so for settings, for mountain biking, I use 4K 24 primarily, and if I'm skiing, I use 4K 30 simply because when I'm skiing, I don't feel like I get much benefit from that extra motion blur, and the footage is a little bit smoother. However, if you're a good skier and you're ripping through trees, 4K 24 would look pretty good. Field of view is always super view, unless I'm filming in 60 frames per second, in which case super view is not an option. Stabilization is always on auto. I turned Pro Tune settings on, and my Pro Tune settings, I have shutter auto. EV comp is either -1 or -0.5. White balance is on auto. The ISO min 100. ISO max I put between 1600 and 3200. If I have decent lighting, I'll do 1600. If I'm expecting slightly less lighting, I'll go 3200. Now you don't want to go too low on your ISO max, otherwise the stabilization will really suffer in low light conditions. Sharpness I put on low, and I'll add just a touch in post-processing. Color I set to GoPro. I find color GoPro pretty accurate, however it's a little contrasty, which I fix in post. But setting it to GoPro color is saving me a lot of time in the editing process. Raw audio is on low, and I set the mics to stereo. Now, I really wouldn't recommend setting it to anything other than stereo if you want good audio. The wind option will really distort the sounds. So what I recommend is getting this foam cover for your GoPro. It's on Amazon for $7 to $8. It'll cut out most of the wind and leave you with fairly crisp audio. So those are the GoPro settings that I use for the GoPro Hero 7. Now let's take a look at the settings I use for the GoPro Hero Max. Okay, for the GoPro Max, there aren't a lot of settings, but let's go through them. So resolution is always 5.6K. That's the max resolution you can get in 360 footage. The frames per second will be 24 frames per second if I'm filming at 24 frames per second on the GoPro Hero 7, or 30 frames per second if I'm filming 30 frames per second on the GoPro 7. Now for Pro Tune settings, I have shutter auto, EV comp between -0.5 and 0. The white balance I set to auto. The ISO min is 100. ISO max is 800. Now I find I can get away with a lower ISO max on the GoPro Max because the stabilization is simply just better overall than the GoPro Hero 7. The sharpness I put to medium just to avoid having to add extra sharpness later on in post. And this really isn't my main camera. I just take clips of it, so I'm just trying to make it easier, save some time in the editing process. Color I set to GoPro. 360 audio. This camera, although it's advertised to have 360 audio, it's actually still not enabled, and it's been 1 year since release, so don't expect 360 audio if you happen to go for the GoPro Max. And the wind setting I turn off. Like I said, it really distorts the audio. All right, so those are the settings that I primarily use for the GoPros. Now, let me give you a few tips in regards to filming while skiing. So number one tip is to carry spare batteries and an extra SD card, and keep the batteries and the camera close to your body so that they stay warm in the cold. You don't want the cold getting to your batteries. It'll completely kill the voltage, and you might get maybe a few minutes of filming if it's really cold. So keep those batteries nice and toasty. That'll get you filming, recording throughout the entire trip. The other tip that I have is to have all your settings and the mounting angle dialed on your GoPro before heading out. The last thing you want to be doing is fidgeting with your GoPro at the top of a mountain when it's like minus 30 degrees Celsius, the wind is blowing, and your friends are waiting for you to ski down. So have those dialed in, and I'd even recommend practicing a few battery changes, because you don't want to drop a battery in the snow or anything, and you want to be pretty quick so your friends aren't waiting for you or anything. So the third and final tip that I have for you is to tether your GoPro mount, because it is extremely hard, speaking from experience, to find a GoPro in the snow. So what I do is I tie a string to the GoPro mount here, and at the other end of the string is a piece of pink ribbon, which actually just tore on me. So essentially it's this. And I tie the string to pink ribbon, so I pulled this out a few times. It just broke, whatever. But the idea here is that if the GoPro ever comes off with the mount, it'll pull the ribbon out of the helmet, and then you've got all of this to help you locate your GoPro in the snow. So what I do for this is stick the ribbon through one of the vents on the helmet, and then I put it in between the shell and the padding. So that's a really handy tip. You don't want to be spending hours looking for a $500-600 GoPro in the winter. Okay, so those are the tips that I have for you for skiing. Now let's take a quick look at some editing tricks or techniques that might help you. All right, let's do some editing now. And basically, I'm just going to show you some of the tips and techniques that I've learned over the last couple of years. I am going to be using Adobe Premiere. That's just what I've been using for the last couple of years. However, you can do the same with DaVinci Resolve and Final Cut Pro. So what we're going to do is just a little bit on mountain biking, skiing, and then a bit on the 360 footage. So I've already got some mountain bike footage here loaded up from Sun Peaks this summer, and one of the first things I do is just kind of brush over the footage to get an idea of the changes that I'm going to need to make. And immediately I can tell, well, it's a sunny day, and when you get into the trees, you get very contrasty footage, and it's a little bit dark in there. So this is a really dark scene right here. Now what I'm going to try to do is even it out. So when you have high contrast, the shadows are really dark and the highlights are really bright. So I'm kind of going to raise the shadows, and if necessary, bring down the highlights. In this scene in particular, we really need to bring the shadows up. And I do not apply any changes to a clip directly. I create an adjustment layer, and then any of these changes that we make to that adjustment layer, we can apply to other clips. So this is going to be a big time saver for editing footage. All right, so I'm going to click on the adjustment layer, and I've got Lumetri scopes on the left here, top left, and I'm basically looking at the two upper spectrograms. And on the right, I've got Lumetri color selected, and I'm in basic correction. Okay, so I'm going to go to the shadows and just lift those up a bit. So we're going to try to see if we can go. I don't go too far, otherwise footage kind of starts to look bad. You'll introduce some noise and stuff. So I'm just going to go for around 60 in this case. I'm going to see, so you can see when I lift up the blacks here, it's very flat. That's just basically lost footage due to the limited dynamic range of a GoPro. So there's just some data that we're not going to be able to recover here. Now, if you lifted the EV on the camera, you might have been able to get this. However, the highlights most likely would have been blown out in some scenes as well. So it's a give or take, and you just kind of got to work with the limitations of the GoPro. So I'm going to bring those blacks just down a little bit again, right around there. You can go to color wheels here and you can try to lift the shadows even more. You can increase the midtones a bit, and already it's starting to look quite a bit better. So this was before and this is after. So already you can see the trail much better than we were able to before. Now I'm just gonna brush the clip again and look at some of the other shadowy high contrast areas and kind of get an idea of what the footage looks like. So we're going through here and it looks pretty decent. So one thing that I also do is maybe just add just a touch of saturation. GoPro color is already saturated, so just a little bit. I usually go around 105, 106, but not too much. And I will go into creative and just add a touch of sharpening here, maybe around 5 or 6 as well. And that's basically all I do for mountain biking footage. Not a whole lot, because that GoPro color saves me a lot of time, and then I just do a little bit of correction for the high contrast. Add a little bit of sharpening and saturation. So that's mountain biking footage. Now let's take a look at the ski footage that I have here. So this is from a trip to Vista Hut last year. We're gonna start with this clip here, which is a very low contrast, very just black and white. There's not a lot going on. So I'm gonna try to make it interesting, just bring out some detail in the snow and add a little bit of color. So you can kind of see that there are a couple of lines here in the snow, and we're going to use that as a guide to kind of bring out some detail in the snow. But first, let's add a little bit of color. So snow has a light blue tinge, so I'm just going to cool off the scene a little bit, add a bit of blue, and always, as always, make sure you're working with the an adjustment layer. So this is how it was initially, and I'm just gonna slide it over to blue, not too much, but there. So now we've got a little bit of color to the scene here. Now, what I'm going to go to is my lumetri scopes, and you can see like most of the data here is in a pretty narrow band. So we're gonna try to spread that apart a little bit. First off, I'm gonna bring the shadows down just to kind of make the trees a little bit stand out from the snow, and that's pretty much it. I might increase the highlights just a touch, pull those up, and that looks good. Okay, so now we are going to go into our curves tab here, and we're going to work with the whites, and I'm going to add some points along the way here. Okay. So basically we're looking at most of the data being between roughly 60 and upwards to 80. So we're going to try to stretch that apart a little bit. So I'm going to go into here, into the whites, and I'm going to pull this down just a touch. So at this point, this is roughly, so this point, this middle part is 50, this is 75. So I'm kind of pulling down all of the color in the 60-ish range here. And already you can see a difference. So this is the before and this is after. So you can see the lines in the snow just a little bit better, and there's some color. So I'd be pretty much happy with this. You can keep trying to pull those apart, so raise the upper part of these colors, but that generally looks good. You don't want to do it too much, or else it starts to, you start to get some noise in it. So this is it. That's how I would edit this clip. If we go here, now this is a very blue scene. This is where the white balance really struggles. So we're just going to quickly correct this. I'm going to take this white balance selector and pick a point on the snow. Now this is now again very black and white, so we're going to add a little bit of color back to that. So I'm just going to cool it off, add some blue tones here, and that looks pretty good, not too much. And I am seeing a little bit of pink hues, pink tint, so I'm just going to drag the tint down just a touch, and that's pretty good. Okay. So that's how I would correct for the white balance there. Now there's no rule on how it should look. You just kind of go by what looks good to you, or at least that's what I do. Yeah, so that's editing ski footage. Now let's take a look at the 360 footage. You've got two options. GoPro recently released GoPro Player for PC. Now this is it's got potential to be very nice, but it's also right now very buggy. It just came out. It took a year for them to release the software, but it's very promising because it can save you time and it's fairly smooth when it's working. But I'm going to show you the way that works 100% of the time. And this is the way everyone had to edit footage on a PC, 360 footage on a PC. Okay, so the first piece of software, both of these you download from GoPro. The first one is GoPro Max Exporter. And I've already dragged in one of my .360 files from the GoPro Max into here. It is a 3.8 gigabyte file for 8 minutes. Now I choose Cineform 5.6K. That's the best quality footage you can get out of this. However, you're gonna get a 30 gigabyte file for 8 minutes of footage, which is pretty insane when you think about it. So you can go to H.265 or H.264. However, you're limited to only 4K, so you're gonna lose some quality in the footage if you go this route. So anyway, I do Cineform 5.6K. I select horizon leveling and world lock. This will save you a lot of time and headaches when you go to reframe it. And hardware decode, I do select because I have a GPU, but if you don't have a good GPU, just don't leave it unselected. And yeah, just go press start, let it export. It takes a while, so go for a walk, grab some coffee. So after you've exported that file, you just drag it into your timeline here in Premiere for me. And this is where you're going to want to use another GoPro program. It's called GoPro Reframe FX or something like that. You can download it from GoPro. It's an Adobe Premiere plugin, so they do not have this plugin for DaVinci Resolve or Final Cut Pro, so you are pretty much limited to Adobe Premiere with this. There might be other options you can work with. I've heard of other options, but this is the official GoPro method. So I've already dragged in my exported 360 footage, and I'm going to go into video effects, and there will be a GoPro effects, select GoPro reframe, drag it onto the clip, go into effect controls, and then select GoPro effects reframe. Now first thing I want to do is upscale the footage from 1080 to 4K, and I'm going to just drag this clip here and line it up with the direction that I'm facing. So that's generally what I start off working with, and usually I will start with a zoom of around 60. Okay, so right now I'm going to insert some keyframes. So I just click on all these stopwatches and I turn off motion blur. It's artificial motion blur and I think it looks pretty bad, so I don't use it. Okay, so this is the first frame I'm gonna work with. Now, once we get up to about here, I'm gonna go into a tiny world view. So I'm gonna zoom all the way out. Now I'm gonna click on the reframe plugin here in the effects and just drag the footage. And we got the tiny world view here. Now, when you make all these changes, it automatically creates keyframes for you. Now I'm just gonna move a bit ahead in time, and I wanna go back to the view I was in before. So I'm just gonna select all of those previous keyframes and copy and paste them. All right, so now we're back to our original point of view. And now let's say right around here, we wanna do a barrel roll. So we'll go into rotate and just do a full 360 rotation, like so. Okay. Now, if you want to smooth out the footage, you can select all of these and just do auto Bezier. You can get a little bit fancier than that, but we're just going to go with that for now and start the clip and see how it looks. So it's going to start moving to the tiny world view, and then it's going to go back to the original view. And when it gets there, it's going to do a barrel roll right there. So there you go. That's basically the main bit of editing. You can get pretty creative. You can do more than what I've shown you, but this is just an example of something I would do. So that's it. Those are the tips or techniques that I have for the footage. I hope it was helpful. I hope the entire video was helpful. If it was, give it a subscribe, a thumbs up. If it wasn't, thumbs down. Leave a comment in the comment section below. And as always, ride on.